Today's episode of Dominaria's Judgment is brought to you by StarCityGames.com, where you know there's a weekly sale lasting until Monday, June the 7th at 10:59 a.m. Eastern, and you know it's at StarCityGames.com/sale. So let me tell you what it is. This week, that sale is giving you 25% off all gaming supplies. That's, let me see here, playmats, dice, deck boxes, binders, life pads, and a whole lot more that I'm sure I'm forgetting. Paper Magic is on its way back, and you want to show up to that in style. You do not want to be that person, and we've all been there, begging to borrow a scrap of paper and some dice, so don't let that be you. Get on over to StarCityGames.com/sale.
This week's Dominaria's Judgment is also brought to you by Coalesce Apparel, the #1 store for Magic the Gathering inspired apparel. Take a look at their t-shirts, hoodies, stickers, and just general stylings at coalesceapparel.shop. Then use gift code SCG at checkout to save 10% on your entire order. And seriously, I want to emphasize that sticker part. Shirts are cool, but you can send a targeted message with a sticker. Slap it on your deck box if it matches your commander, or if you really want to get inventive, find a way to slap the 3x4 sticker on your 2.5x3.5 Magic card, maybe with a sleeve, maybe with a hard case. If you're inventive people, you'll find a way to make it work. So, take a look at coalesceapparel.shop, check out their product lines like Wooburg Forever and Ravnica University, and see what catches your eye. Remember, use gift code SCG at checkout to save 10%. Coalesce Apparel and Design. No one made what they wanted, so they made it themselves.
Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 8, I believe, of Dominaria's Judgment. Already losing count here. This is, as always, a modern podcast brought to you by StarCityGames.com and hosted by me, Dom Harvey, along with Ari Lax. And these are exciting times because the full spoiler for Modern Horizons 2 has just dropped. We got, I guess, about 2/3 of the way through it on our previous episode, and the last third did not disappoint either. So a lot to pour over today. And then now that we have the full spoiler, we can take this more big picture view of what we think the set's like, the impact on the format is going to be here.
Yeah, it looks like this one is, one of my concerns was, would they take the lessons of Modern Horizons 1 to heart? And I think they really did. I think the vast majority of this set is really well targeted at the sort of seasoned pyromancer range of cards that are, if these are among the best cards in Modern, that's a really good thing for the format. So there's just really, 300 cards of that level of dedicated refinement, testing, whatever you want to call it, in here. I'm really excited to basically play with probably about half the set in Modern, honestly.
Yeah, we will get into some of these broad conclusions at the end, but if anything, it seems like in some areas, my big complaint is going to be that they undershot the power level, if anything, but that's just me as a Magic player, maybe just being impossible to please, right? Because if they overshoot it and we're in here complaining about that instead, then, it is so difficult to actually walk that tightrope properly. But let's kick things off here with the cycle, which maybe is the biggest exception to the broad balance of the set here, and that's the Incarnation cycle. And we spoke about grief and solitude and subtlety on previous episodes, and we do now have the remaining members of that cycle here. So endurance and fury, where do we want to start with those?
Let's go down the line. So we kind of listed them, and I think in the end, my rankings, you kind of read them off in the 1 through 5 order I would place them. I think grief is the most powerful because it's the one that is the, it plays by itself. It doesn't really care what your opponent's doing. You can build a deck that is like a legitimate grief deck and just, grief for your opponent out. Solitude's not far behind. Free Swords of Plowshare is pretty crazy. Subtlety is probably third. I could also see it being the worst, but the net impact when it hits is really high, and the rate of casting it is totally fine. And then the first new one, fourth place, probably most powerful, is Fury. That is 3 red for a 3/3 double strike. And when it enters the battlefield, it deals 4 damage divided as you choose among any number of creatures and or planeswalkers, and then it evokes, exile a red card from your hand. And it's really funny. You can see the reactions split among everyone who looks at this card. And there's the half of people who have been pyrokinesis and the half that haven't. Yeah.
Yeah, if you have been on the wrong end of a pyrokinesis, you do not forget it real quick. And often if you're on the right end too, if you get to cast that card, you look for excuses to cast it again because it's a good feeling, let me tell you. I guess the thing that's holding me back on Fury is I don't know exactly what decks it's meant to fit in, where in the various red aggro decks that were good in Strixhaven Modern, you had Prowess, where there's a really high upside to having this effect be on a spell as opposed to a creature, or a non-creature spell, rather. And so that might be enough to take this out of contention there. That being said, if the rate is good enough, and this surely is, then you might be able to stomach that anti-synergy of sorts. And then in a deck like Burn, you really need all of your cards to be able to go upstairs. And I don't know if there is a more mid-rangey or controlling red deck that might make good use of it. The one exception to that actually might be the Ponza deck, like the red-green Utopia Sprawl Arbor Elf deck, which you have a ton of redundant threes, so stuff like Bonecrusher Giant, Clothis, Blood Moon, Seasoned Pyromancer, going out to Blood Red Elf as well. And often in that deck, your hand is clogged with cards of the same mana value, and some of those cards are not very good. Blood Moon is either a fantastic card or one of your worst cards. And sometimes Bonecrusher Giant as Stomp is exactly what you want, and sometimes that's just a 4/3, which is fine-ish, I suppose, but you'd much rather get use out of that effect in some other way if you can. And I think that might actually be the ideal home for Fury, or a show like that at the very least.
Yeah, I think that the two keys to Fury are that so if your deck was already interested in Lava Dart or Searing Blaze, you were probably already crushing the things that Fury beats. So you want it in a red deck that was not already playing those. And then also the other thing is that this is probably one of the most exciting ones to just cast from your hand, like a 5 mana, potential like killing two things. Like what happens when you cast this card from your hand is just hugely swingy, and it closes the game super fast compared to like Solitude, which is just like a 3/2 lifelink is significantly less exciting than a 3/3 double strike, even if it's a true Shriek Maw. Just like the amount that it swings the game is just way less. So I would look for those two things. I think this is probably something to think about in general with this entire cycle, is that it feels like one of the things that they tried to target this at is pushing mid-range decks that were less colors. But I think what's really going to happen is you're just going to have to like rework your threat and answer suite in these 3-color decks to lean towards multicolored cards. And that's something to kind of think about, is like, well, I don't know if Fury's the card that Jund wants, but could you build a red-based Jund deck to cast it?
I think that is a larger point that needs grappling with around these cards, is what is the density of cards in that color that you need in order to make these reliable? And is it okay to be able to miss on these sometimes? And, you can't evoke your grief on turn 1. How backbreaking is that compared to you draw the redundant black card on turn 3 and then you get to fire it off? And again, Legacy players have experience of calibrating their Force of Will count and learning just how many blue cards is enough before you're playing it a little too loose there. I don't know if modern players have that same well of experience yet, but certainly with the cycle, that's something you need to get this intuition for.
Yeah, and also it kind of matters what you're exiling. Like in Legacy, a lot of the work of Force Will is done with Ponder or Preordain that are like good, but not critical to what's going on. But like you often end up in spots where you're like, when you start putting relevant cards in your deck that you'd exile, where it's like, well, I'm going to exile. Legacy, again, just like casting spells in general is more conditional. But in Modern, if you are like, well, the only blue card in my hand is Jace, and that's just how I'm going to win the game, that's a pretty big cost. So I think that's something else to balance, is the impact of what the red cards you are exiling is, or just like having a spread so that you are more likely to draw something that doesn't line up with what you need so that it's sort of expendable.
And we should go through the text on the last member of the cycle, and that's Endurance. This is 1 green for a 3/4 with Flash, and I want to say Reach because any given green creature is decent odds to have Reach, but I think this one actually does, but don't quote me on that. And when this enters the battlefield, you shuffle any number of target cards from a player's graveyard into that player's library. So most often in Modern, this is going to come up against a deck like Dredge, for example. If the Reanimator stuff in the set takes off, then this is a good hedge against that. But also, if you're against Mill, for example, this is a great thing to have access to, just to get that full reshuffle and a clock as well. And of all the cards in this cycle, this one just has the best stats, where sometimes you can just cast this as a 3/4 flash for 3 in your green deck and start attacking with it. And that's going to be much easier given that many green decks are going to have Birds of Paradise, Noble Hierarch, Ignoble Hierarch these days as well. So just as a fair card that you want to cast sometimes, I think Endurance is pretty appealing. And then on top of that, the kind of decks that can find this most consistently are green decks, where you might have cards like Summoner's Pact, Eladamri's Call, just other things that get a creature into the mix. And so maybe you have redundant copies of those you can pitch. So the type of deck that is most able to find a toolbox creature, which is effectively what this is, are the decks in this color. So that's a nice crossover there too.
Yeah, one note, it's slightly, it's not shuffle. The only thing that gets randomized are you put all the cards from the graveyard on the bottom in a random order. So unfortunately, you can't like undo a scry to the top or something with this, which would be nice, kind of across the board value. But not usually super relevant. But yeah, this card, I think this is kind of what I would have been hoping for from the cycle, where like Solitude kind of punishes you for like controlling a creature. Grief punishes you for like having a relevant card in your hand. This punishes you for like doing stuff with your graveyard, at which point like you already know you're getting into some trouble. I am not quite as excited about the 3/4 reach rate on this card as you are, but I am excited about the fact that it like rapidly turns the corner from free disruptive spell into like castable mix of clock plus disruption. I think that's pretty key on this one, is that, imagine just going up against Dredge and being on the play, like with a Noble Hierarch, this card suddenly is a completely different impact on the game than if it would be on the draw, where you kind of are just like, yep, just, eat the entire output of a Cathartic Reunion and also have a creature.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I'm excited about this as just an attacker, but I'm excited about not getting stuck with it in my hand when I have no use for it, I guess is the better way for me of putting that. But I think that this is a good template for how to do a cycle like this if you decide that's really what you want to do. And so maybe that makes it all the more egregious that you have other members of the cycle, like Grief, like Solitude, that are pushing the envelope in a completely different direction.
Yeah, I was thinking like what I would have wanted from this. I think Solitude probably would have been better off designed as like a reprisal instead of swords. More targeted, like more ways to build your deck such that is not relevant. You would still be able to Solitude a Death Shadow or a Gurmag Angler, but your opponent's not just like, well, I control a Noble Hierarch. You're like, yeah, sure, exile that, whatever. That's less of what I would be going for with the cycle.
Yeah, Solitude having flash also, I get that Endurance needs to have flash, Solitude just to function as a card needs to have flash. Solitude is the one card where already just by virtue of being a free spell, this is breaking new ground, and now we're pushing that even further by letting this be Swords of Plowshares as opposed to a sorcery speed version of that effect. And it's going to be quite frustrating now a lot of the time, where you're playing against almost any deck with a decent number of white cards, and you can never take it for granted that the shields are down when they're tapped out. You always have to be cognizant of the possibility of Solitude. And I don't think that's going to lead to healthy dynamics in the long term.
Yeah, also like the flash game with this, once you start building these Azorius control decks that are reaching all the way up to like Cryptic Command, I don't think that that's going to be the most fun thing to play against either. Right.
I know that Michigan's own Kyle Bogomers is very excited about Blue-White Stoneblade, where you have a bunch of the blue-white gold cards, and then you get to play Subtlety and Solitude in your deck if you like. And if you're willing to stretch up to 80 cards for Yorion, it turns out that is a gold card that you can just put into your hand at your convenience. So you always have some padding for your pitch spells there. And that's a kind of shell that we mentioned as the ideal home for these effects, where it's much easier to justify going down a card for this tempo play in a deck where you can press out advantage via Stoneforge Mystic, which is getting a big upgrade in the set that I'm sure we'll get to before the day is done, and just other cards that let you convert that into something meaningful, as opposed to an Esper control deck, for example, where going down a card to play Solitude actually is a meaningful cost.
Yeah, it's also worth noting that Stoneforge Mystic can find a Maul of the Skyclaves, which is a white card that pitches a Solitude.
That too, yeah. So really every base covered on that front. Now that we have the full cycle, you gave a provisional ranking of those. I think mine would roughly be the same. I think Grief and Solitude exist in a tier by themselves, and between them, I think Grief is the better card, but Solitude might see more play, if that makes sense. And then likewise, towards the bottom of the cycle, I think Endurance is the weakest card in the cycle, but I think it might see more play just because of that tutor ability that I mentioned, where this in, let's say a Ram deck that has Eladamri's Call, just having one copy of this in your 75 adds so many more dimensions to how you can play against any kind of graveyard strategy, for example. So I think you'll see more copies of Endurance, but I think Subtlety and Fury in that 3 and 4 spot might be the more powerful cards.
Yeah, no, I think we're in total agreement on that. I think it's also worth noting we kind of came to a mutual agreement. We're going to rank some cards from the set at the end. I think there's maybe 2 cards in the entire set that come close to even matching the worst of these. So we've agreed to, for purposes of ranking, these are numbers 1 through 5, and we'll just talk about the next few cards.
Yeah, these come as a package deal. So I don't know exactly what the verdict on this is going to be if in 3 months' time we will already be sick of the play patterns that these cards have generated. But we'll get onto some of the cards in the set that actually have a mana cost after this short break.
If you are looking to sell your Magic the Gathering cards, it's never been easier than with StarCityGames.com. Make the best of our 30% store credit bonus and the fastest turnaround time in the industry when you use any of our 4 simple ways to sell located at StarCityGames.com/sell. You can check out our buy list, box up your cards and send them our way with the ship and sell program. Come on in to the Star City Games Center in Roanoke, Virginia for that personal touch. Or if you have everything, 500,000 cards, you want to store and you want to move some bulk, we'll come to you. And seriously, when we're talking about these large collections, Star City does mean they will come to you. The list of places goes from Ohio to New Jersey and elsewhere. Seriously, I've driven from Ohio to New Jersey. That is not a short drive. So head on over to StarCityGames.com/sell, that's SELL, for more details on all these great options, and maybe clear up a little space in your life for your next project, even if that happens to just be even more Magic cards or another Commander deck.
And we're back to dive into more of the now complete Modern Horizons 2 spoiler here. So I think what we want to do, given that once again we had quite a nice bounty of goods here, is to do the same format of quick hits, where there are a few cards that we'll want to get into in a little bit more detail, but for the most part we'll be getting through the highlights of this last third of the spoiler, fairly quickly.
Which double black card do you want to kick it off with?
Let's start with Dam, which is one of the more eye-catching designs from the set, and I think is just a home run from every angle. So this is black for just your straight-up Doomblade Terror-ish removal spell, but then Overload for 2 white to turn it into a Wrath of God. So really tying the room nicely together here. And I don't know exactly what deck is going to want this, and it seems kind of flippant to say, well, if you're a black-white deck, then you should have this card on your radar. But for example, does a Nesper control deck that maybe wanted to have Supreme Verdict or a Sweeper somewhere in its 75 before, is this now just a strict upgrade, or are there subtle trade-offs involved there?
I think that this card, I was not super impressed with it, but then I started thinking a little more about the implications. And I think that we're talking about this Esper control shell or whatever. I think what you're going to see is that these Esper control decks that would normally have to settle for playing 1 to 2 sweepers, maybe another in the sideboard, are now going to actually be able to build their deck with 3, maybe 4 sweepers total without really any cost, because they probably wanted, 1 to 2 removal spells along these lines. Maybe this isn't optimal, but just the ability to double up there. One of the issues with like a bunch of Supreme Verdicts is that you often play against decks where you want to play an efficient removal spell, and then you kind of like a mid-range matchup like against a Tarmogoyf where every time that you cast Supreme Verdict on a Tarmogoyf, your shields are down for the next turn. Whereas with Dam, you can just, fire it off, leave up mana, and just kind of move on with your life.
Yeah, I wonder if there is a more proactive black-white deck that can make good use of this, where against a creature-heavy opponent, often the only thing that could get you back in the game is a sweeper of some kind, but you can't really justify putting that card in your deck if it was just a Wrath of God, for example, because it's so conditional and it doesn't help you to press your advantage when you are ahead. And Dam fills both roles there, where if the board is at parity, or maybe you find a window to seize the initiative, this card lets you do that, just 2 mana to kill their creature and get in there. But then also, if you are falling behind, then you do have that failsafe. You have that sweeper effect to bail you out.
I think in those decks, I view this more of a sideboard extension role where, like, yeah, you probably, a lot of Jund decks have always played a Terminate or, Obzon decks playing like Abrupt Decay or similar. But if you just have a couple of these, you no longer need to play quite as many sweepers in your sideboard to just cover at the same level that you would against, some tribal deck.
Yeah, and definitely some other good reasons in the set to be in some kind of Orzhov base, whether it's Mardu or Abzan, or I guess we covered Esper already. Let's get into one more of those here. This is the other big double black card from the set, Dalthi Void Walker. So this is black for a 3/2 shadow, and it has the Leyline of the Void text, where if a card would be put into your opponent's graveyard, you exile it instead, and then you can sacrifice Dalthi Void Walker to cast one of those exiled cards for free without paying its mana cost.
Yeah, I'm not quite as excited about this card, so I'll let you fire off on it first.
Yeah, I think that the upside here is very high, and it might be the kind of thing which is quite eye-catching, but never ends up actually making it into any decks in practice. But when we spoke about the impact of Ragavan in Modern, and why that card might be more limited here than it would be in either a smaller format or a larger format, this is kind of precisely the wrong size. There were two aspects of that, right? There was one half of it was there are decks which are doing a very unique thing, and so taking a random card from those decks doesn't really serve any particular purpose. But the other half of that was decks tend to play up and down the curve more than they do in a format like Legacy, for example. And so, yeah, if you run into some kind of obscure combo deck where you have no use for Phyrexian Unlight, for their Desperate Ritual or something, then that's going to limit what this card can do there. That being said, in those matchups, having a fast clock that does have potential utility to back out your disruption is a good place to be. But the ceiling on this card, on the other side there, is very high, where sometimes against one of these decks, you can play this on turn 2, and then your turn 3 discard spell or Liliana of the Veil or something will snag a Khan Liberated, Teferi Hero of Dominaria, a Primeval Titan, and the game will basically end on the spot. And so it seems like the base case, if you have time and you're not under a ton of pressure, is not that bad. The ceiling is incredibly high, and then also, if you do get paired against anyone brave enough to register a graveyard deck in this new modern format, then you just KO them for free as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of this card depends on where people are stretching their curves, and my opinion is some of the effects in the set kind of push you both ways. And I guess we'll just see exactly where this ends up in that. Because I think that it's really just going to depend on whether you can cast a 4 to 5 drop for free in like a average matchup and have it be good, or whether that's just going to be a bunch of collected companies in that kind of slot. I do think this is somewhat competing for the same space as Endurance. A lot of the decks where I'm specifically like, I would like a creature to be my hate card here, are the ones that are green, black, that kind of range. And with Ignoble Hierarch, black's less of a concern. But it's really just a matter of which graveyard hate piece you kind of want for that spot.
Yeah, I think for me, it's if I put Endurance in my deck or bring it in a certain matchup, it's because I want that effect, and the body is secondary there. With this card, I'm putting it in my deck, likely in my main deck, because I think it's just a good card to have. And then the upside there against a certain sliver of the format is very high. And I could, in theory, just have this as one of my graveyard hate cards if it's, maybe it's more compatible with Lurrus, let's say, than something like Leyline of the Void would be. And Lurrus is a big deal for and against this card, where against another Lurrus deck, the static ability on this is a great thing to have. But then also with your own Lurrus, this is a recursive threat that has this high upside. And bear in mind that when you recast this with Lurrus, it still sees all the cards that were exiled the first time because of the way it was worded. And so if you got several good cards when the Void Walker was there before, you still get to dip into that pool afterwards. And I think between this and potentially Torak, the creature from the set as well, you're at a point now where you can build, let's say, a Rakdos midrange deck with Lurrus as a companion that still has a lot of really good threats to close the game out with. And that was always the issue before, where you would see like Willie Edel in the queues on Magic Online all the time, having to sling up things like Magmatic Channeler, which was never that inspiring, or busting out Dark Confidant again for a spin. And now you just get to upgrade all those cards. And so between, let's say, Stealthy Voidwalker, Croxer, and Torak, that's a good threat suite by itself, all of which is compatible with Lurrus. And the graveyard hate on this effect is a good hedge against the kind of stuff that tends to be resilient to a pile of Fatal Pushes and Thor Seizes, where typically game one against something like Dredge, you were really hoping to draw one of your main deck scavenging uses, I suppose, and hope that was good enough. And now you have a nut draw, so to speak, where sometimes the game will just end on the second turn.
That's fair. And also, this card pairing with Thoughtseize is probably the best possible, because otherwise, we're not like thought scouring someone and hoping to hit something big. You actually want to place it from their hand to the graveyard to the exile zone, and then that's how you would cast something ridiculous for free.
Right. So let's move on to a card that I know you are high on, and that's Hard Evidence.
Yeah, I have in the show notes, parentheses, Cold Shot. This is the Arkham's Astrolabe of the set. Every time I think about this card, it gets a little better. It's producing... So, like, the initial thing that it was called out as is like, oh, this makes two things for indomitable creativity if you're doing that nonsense. It just makes two things. Like, think of this as Arboreal Grazer that produces a card of value instead of a land drop, maybe. Maybe that's a good way to think about it. Think of it as something you can flashback with Snapcaster Mage. There's just a lot this card does. It's, a cheap artifact, Astrolabe, again, it's an Astrolabe in the sense that it's going to refund you a card, be a cheap artifact, also like do extra things on the battlefield. It really just does a lot. Like, it's Thraben Inspector as a creature, like the synergies for like, this is a creature, you get to do stuff with it, are a little less, I think they're a little less flexible in terms of like the creature being a 1-drop stops mattering in the late game, whereas like the spell synergies, the spells being cheaper going late tends to matter more because spells just tend to be more modular when you're chaining them off.
And especially in blue, I think having this effect on an instant or sorcery has a high upside compared to having it on a creature, and the reverse is true in white. So I think that both this card and Thraben Inspector are in the right colors for doing what each of them wants to be doing.
Yeah. Also, this card and our preview card from earlier this week, Murktide Regent, probably pretty good buddies.
Yeah. So in a format where you don't have stuff like Ponder and Preordain as these early smoothing plays in your blue deck, I could see this filling a more important role there where, you have Opt, you have Serum Visions, you have Thought Scourer, which again in your Murktide Regent deck is probably where you want to start there. But there's less competition for that kind of slot now, and this just does, as you say, a bunch of different things. And I don't know if this is the kind of early play that you want in an Urza deck, for example, or this helps to this gives you a speed bump that like bridges you to Emry on turn 2, or if there's some artifact stuff you want to be doing, then this might be an interesting candidate there.
Yeah, I think the other card we kind of have as the headliner of this last batch, and it's weird to call it in the last batch, is another one of these cards that is this kind of flexible early game fixing that we haven't quite had in the format, and that's Abundant Harvest. I have not played a bunch with this card because I haven't played a ton of Historic post Strixhaven, but I've only heard good things about it.
Yeah, this is a weird one where the consensus seems to be this card is busted, and also no one is talking about it because it's just existed in the ether as this distant prospect for a few months. And so now that it is sneaking up on us, it's finally here, people have just kind of lost the motivation to really discuss the details of it.
Yeah, I think part of that is also that it's existed in the context of Historic, which is a format that has notably worse mana than Modern. So putting a green card into your blue and red synergies deck is a big deal. Whereas in Modern, it's kind of like, okay, what else am I adding?
Yeah, I know some Historic streamers were trying Temur Arclight Phoenix with this as one of the 1-dot cantrips, and that sounds like a good idea, but that is a format which does now have Faithful Suiting, whereas Modern, sadly, or maybe not, depending on your view, does not. So I don't know exactly where this card slots in two decks. Is it the case that if you are building, let's say, a Jund deck or some kind of green mid-range deck that has a lot of generic cards in it, you start the list with 4 copies of this and then go from there? Or does this fill a more specialized role in the format?
I think I just want to start playing it in Amulet Titan and then see where it goes from there.
Yeah, my issue with it in that deck was that both on the land side and the non-land side, you often want a specific thing in either of those slots, where you want exactly a bounce land, let's say, or a Castle Garenbrig, and finding the one Bajuka Bog that you need in there as part of the toolbox is not going to help you. And likewise, on the non-land side, maybe you really need Amulet of Vigor this turn, or maybe you run into that classic bottleneck of, well, I only have 8 Titans in my deck and I could really use one right about now, and digging up an Arboreal Grazer or something won't get the job done. So if you need to find specific cards a lot of the time, I don't know if this is at its best. Whereas if you just need to find either a land or a spell and you're mostly going to be happy with whatever you hit, then I think it's a more natural fit.
That's fair. Just kind of going either way in some kind of, mid-range, somewhat proactive deck.
Yeah, so my quick verdict on this card, I think, is an incredibly powerful card that I expect to see in Modern, but I'm having a hard time figuring out where for some reason.
I mean, that's kind of how Ponder was when it was first printed. People were just kind of like, does this actually deserve a slot in Fairies? And now we look back, 14 years later or whatever it is, and just like, what were you thinking? Why wasn't this just 4 of?
A debate to relitigate another time, maybe. But with some of that stuff out the way, should we move on to, I guess, the reprints or the actual, maybe slightly more questionable new prints from this set?
Let's hit some of the new print quick hits that we have laid out here, because I think those are interesting to discuss, at least also why they aren't in this kind of top level, we really want to hit on this card section.
Okay, so let's kick this off with a fun one here in Magus of the Bridge, which is just black for a 4/4 human wizard that has the Bridge from Below text on it. So without the graveyard clauses, of course. So whenever a non-token creature you control would die, you get a 2/2 zombie. And crucially, if a creature an opponent controls would die, you exile Magus of the Bridge. So this one may not be long for the world, depending on what goes on the battlefield here. But I am slightly bemused that we don't get to see the Hogak text of you can't you can't spend mana to cast a spell, making a return appearance there.
Yeah, though I do think the thing that interests me most with this card is hitting it off Collected Company. The other half of it being that if you sacrifice the Magus, you get a zombie, which is not really how Bridge worked. But it's just a lot of cards in this set produce a lot of resources, but don't really give you something like an idea of what to do with those resources. And this is just like another one of those cards that's just going to give you a million things, and then you kind of have to figure out what to do with it.
Yeah, I could see like a fair Yawgmoth deck of some variety wanting this card, where maybe you are still a company deck. Maybe you have like Ignoble Hierarch helping to bridge the gap here and stuff like Carrion Feeder, other cheap sacrifice outlets, and then maybe your threes like Magus of the Bridge, Grouse Messenger, and then if you have any combination of those and sacrifice outlet, you really just get to do off and do some silly things. Or following the template that we've seen in Historic and Pioneer, maybe there's some John Company deck that's heavy in black, where like this and Mayhem Devil can team up in some way.
Yeah, I'm actually just kind of thinking through that whole Yawgmoth thing, and that this Grouse Messenger Yawgmoth is infinite. Huh. Okay, then.
Oh, it is? Wow.
Yeah,
I hadn't even... I figured, I can do some good stuff from there. I'm probably going to win the game, but I hadn't clocked that actually just does the whole thing.
Yeah, that's pretty sweet. Mono Black Yawgmoth coming to a format near you. Along the same lines, Nested Shambler stood out for me. There's a long history of Doom Traveler style effects just showing up in Constructed. And this is one in like the right color for Modern, with the right types, and with some kind of scaling effect that you can abuse. So this is it's black for a 1/1 zombie, and when it dies, you make X tapped squirrel tokens, where X is its power. So it starts at 1, but you can scale it up.
Yeah, and if you have any kind of maybe some zombie lord or a way to put a bunch of counters on this, then you really get to kind of build your own hangabout worker, so to speak, here.
Yeah. This is like, it's really just a cog, but in the context of like Magus of the Bridge, Carrion Feeder, Goblin Bombardment, it's a pretty strong cog.
Yeah, this is one of those cards that is part of that final spoiler drop of 40, 50 cards at once, and you glide over it as you're looking through those cards, and then 6 months later, you play against some deck where this is like the 56th to 60th card that actually somehow ties the room together.
Yeah. Probably not the kind of deck you want to be playing against the next card we're going to talk about, which is Sanctifier and Vec. This is white for a 2/2 protection from black and red. When it enters the battlefield, exile all black and red cards from all graveyards. And if a black or red permanent spell or card not on the battlefield will be put into a graveyard, exile it instead. I think there's some funky wording there to deal with the whole Leyline of the Void doesn't exile tokens thing, but this one makes sure it does.
Yeah, this one means business. This is heavy duty graveyard hate, and between this and Delphi Voidwalker and even some of the more incidental graveyard hate that you see in this set, where Territorial Kavu, for instance, it does a whole bunch of things, and one of those things is it can attack and just exile cards from a graveyard for some reason, or there are various modal cards where exiling cards from graveyards or shuffling them back in is a big part of that too, and Endurance as a member of that cycle. I wonder what assumptions they were working under when the set was designed. Like, did they think that they were going to be printing some kind of effect on the Order of Faithless Looting, and we now just need really good main deckable hate to hedge against that? Or I guess if you're putting stuff like Unmarked Grave and Persist in the set, then you don't want that to go too far. I wonder what the mindset actually was, and specifically what they were scared of.
They were testing against full power Lurrus, to be fair.
They were, yeah. And you have an interesting peek behind the curtain here where Sam Black, when talking about Academy Manufactor, the 3-drop which turns food, clue, or treasure into one of each, apparently that card initially started at 2 mana, but then in testing with fully powered Lurrus, you could just do some fairly ridiculous things with that. And it makes you wonder how many cards over this time frame where companions were locked but hadn't just broken the chains of every format yet. I wonder how many cards got that little mana bump where they had to go from 2 mana to 3 mana, or some other tweaks had to be made with companions in mind, and we are just never going to get to hear the full origin story there.
Really, I think I'm fine with what they did. I think that Modern is better if those cards are pushed to the 3 slot. Like, I've already been playing with Academy Manufactor, and it being 3 has not been a concern.
That card is both really fun and really exciting, and potentially really good. So we might circle back around to that one later on. But continuing on Sanctifier on Vec, this is, I think, an excellent card. I do wonder if we've seen, let's say, human sideboards in the past run Aureoc Champion, where you're primarily doing that for the protection from black, protection from red, and then the life gain is a nice incidental benefit in the matchups where you tend to bring that in. I wonder if that is just a straight swap now, where you get to upgrade or sidegrade your champions into this card, and then you now don't have to run something like Grafdigger's Cage on top of that. Now, in a deck like Heliod, for example, this is a really nice double white pip hate card if you want that in your sideboard, but Aureoc Champion has a specific combo role for your main plan there where that's not really replaceable in the same way.
I think you would find that the life gain on Champion comes up even more than you think. I think that in like the fair matchups, Sanctifier might be like a little better against the Lurrus decks, but the life gain off Champion comes up in creature mirrors. It's actually like, there was a period of time before Blast Zone where Aureoc Champion plus Phantasmal Image was a hard lock against Dredge. Like, they would be unable to defeat you with the entire contents of their library. So I don't know if it's quite as clean as you think it would be. But I'm willing to believe that if you're really scraping for sideboard slots and something like Burn isn't a big issue in the metagame, then you can definitely shift over to Sanctifier.
Yeah, I mean, this card, in fairness, also just a hard lock by itself against Dredge, but I do take your point there. I think that also the 2/2 stats on this, you're never excited to pay for a grizzly bear if the text on the grizzly bear isn't doing anything for you. But it does make it more easy to justify main decking this card in some context, maybe in some kind of a Call of Calling, Eladamri's Call toolbox deck, where if you draw it, just having a 2/2 with relevant protection sometimes is a nice upgrade over just having a mopey 1/1.
That's fair. Also, still an Imperial Recruiter range.
Yeah, and that card definitely one we will talk about in some detail. Let's move on to Necrogoyf. So this is 3 black as the sticker price. This is a X4 Lurgoyf, and the X is equal to the number of creature cards in all graveyards, so yours and your opponent's. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player discards a card, and it has madness for 1 BB, so it's effectively a 3-drop if everything's going well for you.
Yeah, I'm not super into this card. I think that jumping through the hoop to get it as a 3-drop that, I don't really know what its power would need to be for me to be really excited by it.
Yeah, I think the whole madness theme in this set is just a miss in general. And I wouldn't be too harsh on that in most cases where, in basically every set you have 10 different sub-themes for limited, and not all of those are going to make their way to constructed. But they did explicitly call out madness as a theme that they thought was somewhat close to being viable in modern, but maybe needed a few cards to push it over that line. And I'm just not seeing what that deck is meant to look like. And if this is if this is intended as a centerpiece of that, then I think they have kind of wildly misevaluated what the deck was missing in modern or where modern might be going.
I think it's also tough with Madness and also Delirium, another one of the mechanics that we think kind of miss in this set. When you start pushing these things that make you want this engine and all these specific pieces, and you dedicate your whole deck to putting stuff in the graveyard, you end up in a spot where you have built a deck that just loses to graveyard hate and isn't dredge. And you really, you really need to have some other thing going on in order for your deck to exist. And that thing often has to be on the level of free 4/4s via Hollow One.
Yeah, this might be running into a version of the Plague Engineer problem from the first Modern Horizons, where you have a set one of whose goals is to push tribal decks, and then you put this one of the best anti-tribal hosers of all time, maybe the best one, in the same set with them, and that just is now dead on arrival, effectively. And I worry that the same might be true here, where even if you didn't have any of the graveyard hate in this set, or even if you didn't have cards like Leyline of the Void or Rest in Peace or Nile Spellbomb in the modern format, I still don't know if these decks would have what it takes to get off the ground. And with all of those factors in mind, I just think it's a complete non-starter. And even if we're wrong, and even if the deck is good, it's likely to just repeat the same play patterns that people kind of got sick of before, whether it's Vengevine or Hollow One, or I don't know what new this is adding, rather than just giving some old favorites or some old kind of notorious menaces another day in the sun.
Yeah, and I guess it's worth mentioning that the Madness ability isn't directly affected. You exile the card as you're discarding it, but when you build a Madness deck, you're discarding cards, and stuff's going to end up in your graveyard, and that's what the secondary level of what you're trying to abuse is often approaching. And a lot of these cards literally say graveyard, like Necrogoyf, or indirectly say graveyard, like Blazing Rootwalla being a 0 for Vengevine. So it's tough. The set put all of its free spell points into reactive cards, and there's not a lot of free spell points being used to support other archetypes.
Even if this payoff or some of the other payoffs are stronger, the other issue is that there are just no good enablers anymore. Now that we don't have Faithless Losing, I did scroll over the spoiler dump today just to see if something like Putrid Imp had snuck its way into the set somehow, but it doesn't matter if you have a Basking Rootwalla now, or you have a kind of pushed rare or mythic rare, if the enablers just aren't there. And maybe this barrage of graveyard hate is clearing the way for Faithless Looting to make a return at some point. That wouldn't fully surprise me. But as it stands right now, what are we discarding these cards with that's actually any good?
I don't have a good answer. I would be regarding Faithless Looting. I think if you ban Stinkweed Imp and Golgari Thug, you could give it a try. And that's, I'm not going to go too deep into that opinion, because there's a lot of polarizing debate around dredge, but I think that's what would have to happen before you could even think about putting looting in the format.
Yeah, if we ever have a slow news week, we'll just kick it over to some banners discussion just to roll the people up and and get the comments flowing in. But in the meantime, it seems like we agree that this card, Necrogoyf, and the whole Madness sub-theme as a whole, kind of a miss in this set, unfortunately.
Yeah, kind of a miss. There's a little bit of hope, but the hard Madness stuff is definitely a miss. I am certainly more excited about the sort of complete opposite half of the set, which is a lot of the token nonsense, which one of the cards that was previewed after we discussed last week is kind of a headliner for, and that's Tireless Provisioner. 2 and a green for a 3/2 Elf Scout. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, create a food or a treasure token. So in fiddling with this card, I've been largely more excited by Tireless Tracker, but the interaction where you have both of them on the battlefield tends to be a little better than just stacking up one or the other, has been my experience.
Yeah, and if you have the manufacturer in play with it, whether it's from Collected Company or you've used Imperial Recruiter to find whichever piece you're missing, in that case, whichever of Tracker or Provisioner you have, you're getting all three regardless. And I guess Tracker has a little bit more upside at that point. But both of them key off the same cards, and I can imagine the deck that wants one, if it is focusing on these token synergies, could very easily just want the other at the same time, especially if you're a Collected Company deck, and so you want to have as many 3-drops as possible to get your the high mana yield from that card.
Yeah, I think the one thing worth noting with this card is that the functionality is largely just a bulkier Lotus Cobra, but like nothing wrong with that, especially because you can sort of store your mana and do some fiddly stuff where like you don't have to, like, the plays where you're like Lotus Cobra, crack a fetch, have to do something now don't happen with this. You can like Tireless Provisioner, crack a fetch, next turn do something really insanely large.
Yeah, I was definitely intrigued by the Glimpse of Freedom. I think not Glimpse of Freedom, whatever the Warp World is called. That deck that you posted in your article last week, and some of these other token silliness shells that I've seen floating around. I do wonder if there is some kind of Urza deck that could accommodate this, and that was where I looked at that for my piece on Imperial Recruiter, where Recruiter finds Urza, finds the manufacturer, and then some other pieces as well. And then once you have Urza with certainly Tireless Tracker, but also Provisioner or any of the other stuff, you really are just getting to do a whole bunch of game actions on one turn.
Yeah. It's just a lot of the cards are just kind of like, you can make as many resources as you want, and it's up to you to figure out how to spend that. And this is definitely one of those.
You do have to be careful that you are accomplishing something rather than just spinning your tires and going into your deck box and getting out 5 of this token and 4 of this token. You do need to translate that into something meaningful. And that's where I think the ability to make treasures is quite important there, because being able to instantly convert one type of resource into another is the key to bridging the gap. Whereas, certainly one experience I've had with Tireless Tracker is, okay, I've made a bunch of clues, but I know that unless something really changes in the next turn or two, I'm just not going to have time to actually get through all of those in the course of this game.
Yeah, So I think the key we're talking about, like getting somewhere, is you want some sort of big true combo finish, where it just happens that when you aren't actually able to assemble the full combo, your cards are producing value that will bury your opponent or just doing something naturally good along the way.
Yeah, on the subject of Academy Manufacturer, which I don't remember how much detail we spoke about this card in before, but I think the one thing that really excites me with that card is Gingerbread Cabin, where now any fetch land can turn into not just 2 triggers for your Tracker or your Provisioner, but a food token that then becomes 3 tokens, and then you work from there. So you can get to the point, if you construct your mana base this way, where you basically never run out of, I was going to say never run out of food. That is literally true, but you never run out of fodder for your manufacture, and then that leads to bigger and better things.
Interesting. I had not really messed around with Gingerbread Cabins too much, but the fact that Yavimaya exists is certainly a help there.
Oh, sure. I hadn't even considered that angle. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That was one of the things I noticed building the Glimpse of Tomorrow Warp World style deck, is that you would often flip up a bunch of fetches but then you would just have a Yavimaya every so often, and that would let you make 1 billion mana with your fetches, even if you ran out of life or targets.
Let's mention Yavimaya quickly then. So this is the green Urborg, basically. And I did ask my followers, what would the power rankings be if each color had its own Urborg? And as Aaron Forsyth pointed out, the red one is right out because of Valakut. And then the blue one with Boil and Boiling Seas on one side, and then I guess we don't really want Merfolk to have that effect in their Lord of Atlantis deck, but maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that is, if you're pushing Merfolk, that's the nuclear option.
Yeah, and then what he said, the white one had Flash Freeze or Flash Fires as a similar issue. I think that it's interesting. I think that Urborg, like actual Urborg, is probably the second most powerful of those, behind the red equivalent. And then blue is somewhere close, and then white and green are the two least attractive. Yavimaya might actually be the least powerful because it's really hard. It's hard to build a green deck that is not like, I would like just like some green mana and then a lot of green mana, or like a lot of forest. A lot of what green does is a lot about like, I'm going to have a lot of green mana early and then bridge it into a bunch of other colors. And Yavimaya just like doesn't really fit that mold.
Yeah, it's tough to find a new role for this card. On top of just, I guess, my deck has one copy of Pendelhaven, and now I get to decide what's the best marginal 23rd, 24th Greenland for that slot. I don't know if you can find a way to use the type setting on this card. The only thing that came to mind was Knight of the Reliquary can now sacrifice anything, including Flagstones of Trocaire. But beyond that, which already is a lot of hoops to jump through, I don't know what there is that this card really opens up in the way that Urborg does with Cabal covers or something like that, for example.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. It's like Beacon of Creation, maybe. It's a little sketchy.
And then, now that one is a nice heater from the mid-2000s for sure.
Yeah, a real classic. Yeah, I'm doing the search right now, and I've got like Beacon of Creation and Dungrove Elder, which not quite cutting it, I think.
It's certainly not in Modern here in 2021. Let's see if the same is true for another card here, Archon of Cruelty. So this is 6 black for a 6/6 Archon. This one has a lot of words, so let me make sure I've got all of them here. So whenever this enters the battlefield or attacks, target opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker, discards a card, and loses 3 life, and you draw a card and gain 3 life. And it has flying to boot as well. So I imagine this is seeded in the set as a good thing to actually persist into, which, as we mentioned before, the pool of good targets for these non-legendary reanimation spells is actually surprisingly barren in Modern for the most part.
Yeah, I think this is a really good one. It's a really good default to kind of pick up. It's not quite as much inherent value as a Gristlebrand, but it's, in terms of what it's doing to swing a game, it's like not... I mean, it is out of the ballpark, but like it's, the next best thing.
And crucially, this doesn't go after lands, and so you don't get to the point with like Sundering Titan or Woodfall Primus or Terrasodon, which I guess is also a good persist target, where you just blow up their lands and they just don't have the ability to take part in the game anymore. With this one, they still get to develop their battlefield, and then if they remove it, then you do still get something in return, but you don't get too much. So I think it does strike a good balance there.
Yeah, my only question is that there's not a backup to Persist. Like, Persist is really good. There's not an equivalent that's even close to it in Modern. And as a result, a lot of my thoughts are like, well, am I supposed to persist something like Grave Titan that I could actually cast instead of an 8-drop?
Yeah, I think you would have to be confident that the Priest of Fell Rights is going to survive for you and actually do what it's intended to do. Because, yeah, otherwise you are all in on Persist, or I guess first step for the Goryo, which is so much more restrictive that I guess it technically works with this to some extent, but that's really not the ideal target there, for example.
Yeah, the Reanimator deck is exciting on some of the power level, but I'm going to have to wait and see on the rest of it.
Yeah, I think it's TBD on power level, and the counterplay in this format got a massive boost with this set, so not too optimistic about that one's chances at present. How do you feel about Cauldron Compleat? So this is a 7-drop equipment with Living Weapon, the amalgamation of the Mirrodin block Cauldron equipment cycle. And so it has Indestructible, and equipped creature gets +5/+5 and has First Strike, Trample, Indestructible, Haste, and whenever this creature deals combat damage to a creature, you exile that creature. And equip for 7 as well. So this is basically, I guess you could trash or treasure this in or something, but for the most part, this is the highest upside Stoneforge Mystic target of all time, potentially.
Yeah, it's certainly the fastest clock, right? That's the thing that makes me most interested in it, is it kind of takes Stoneforge Mystic to another level of like actually winning the game if you are backing Stoneforge Mystic with Disruption. So that's kind of, again, this is the, if you have free spells and are trying to compete against any combo deck, this is pretty good at just ending the game.
Yeah, the split that you would often see with Stoneforge Mystic was, I want Batterskull, that one is locked in, and that's going to be the go-to target most of the time. And even if my Stoneforge Mystic dies, usually I can build towards the point in the game where I can cast the Batterskull, and then you would have somewhere in the 75, let's say, a Sword of Feast and Famine for the combo matchups where just attacking with a 4/4 lifelinker would not really get you anywhere, but the disruptive ability of Sword of Feast and Famine and getting to play something else and then untap your lands, hold up interaction, would come in handy instead. And I wonder if Cauldron is an upgrade to Sword in that role for the most part, where, especially now that so much of your interaction is actually free between the Evoke, Elementals, and Force Negation and so on, untapping your lands just doesn't do as much for you anymore. Whereas if you play Stoneforge Mystic on 2 and put this in on 3, that is a very fast clock, which is going to raise a lot of kind of middling combo draws.
I think it really depends on how many other creatures you're playing. I think with Sword, it's just like, how reliably can I have another body ready to suit up and equip? It's probably just this card is faster most of the time, because Mystic, you can drop this on 2 and just go from there. I don't think it's like hugely game breaking though against the rest of the format, because you can just go with the standard route and go after the Stoneforge Mystic and then leave this really stranded. Whereas Batterskull, like you said, does eventually have a point where it gets cast.
Yeah, you do have to be very confident that Stoneforge Mystic is surviving to do its thing, which against some combo decks you can be, but even against, let's say, some Boomer Valakut deck, Lightning Bolt on your Stoneforge Mystic, if you've committed to this plan, might throw a wrench in the equation. So high risk, high reward, for sure. How do you feel about Master of Death? So this is a Squee Goblin the Bob in zombie form, 1 blue-black for a 3/1. When it enters the battlefield, you surveil 2. So scribe the cards go to your graveyard instead of the bottom of your library. And if this card is in your graveyard at the beginning of your upkeep, you can pay 1 life and return it to your hand. So we've seen Squee pop up from time to time, but the thing with Squee is the body is basically irrelevant for the most part, and especially in a format that doesn't have stuff like, Survival of the Fittest or anything like that. It basically is just a piece of cardboard that can go between zones. Whereas with this one, the body and the creature types and so on might actually have a part to play as well.
Yeah, I really don't care about any of the text on this card. I just care about the color identity for pitching to forces. I think that's really the question you're looking for, is whether you're trying to pick up fuel for Force of Negation or something similar. And that's kind of where the vintage dredge decks have looked with this card. They're like, oh, I get to pitch this to Unmask and Force of Will instead of having Squee, which does nothing. So I really don't care about the text, power, and toughness types. Just like, do you need a blue card in your hand? Great, this will be there.
Yeah, so I think the most likely home for this would be in like the Crabvine deck, for example, where you're milling yourself a bunch. On your upkeep, you pick this up. That gives you fuel for grief, and then you cast your second creature that returns your Vengevine, and you go from there. Or sometimes if you're milling a bunch of cards, then this sets off the Gravecrawler into Vengevine Chain by itself, where you pick this up, you cast it, you cast your Gravecrawler, bring everything back. I think this card has a very niche role to play, but in that role it is, nothing else does the same thing, basically.
Yeah, that makes sense. And technically it is just a castable card that's not the worst if your opponent plays any card with the word void in its name. Yeah, a weird kind of addition to the graveyard decks that's not really adding anything degenerate to start with, but kind of bolstering the next level. Maybe a more degenerate graveyard card is Resurgent Belief. This was one of the every set there's that rare that kind of drops in the final dump that you're just kind of like, wait, what? This wasn't previewed somewhere. And this is the white member of the costless cycle. It's a no cost sorcery. Suspend 2 for 1 and a white, which is like, suspend 2 is not long. And the text is return all enchantment cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. So
yeah, I was really hoping, I guess, replenish itself, maybe with, I don't know its reserve list status necessarily, but was not hoping for exactly replenish in the set, but some kind of maybe more modern twist on that card, and I got my wish at the last possible second here. So just going through the quick hits on what you can return with this, there's the cycling package, which we've seen in some legacy replenish decks of Lay Claim. So this is the confiscate. You control enchanted permanent that has cycling for 2 cast out, and then also Shark Typhoon as probably the just best card as a fair card in that bunch. So already that's a decent kind of almost build your own living end style thing there, where instead of Striped Riverwinder or whatever, you have Cast Out and Shark Typhoon. But you can also, if you have ways to manually dump enchantments, there are some good ones at the top end. So stuff like Kiora Bessa Sea God or Overwhelming Splendor, I think is going to be the best one in a lot of matchups. Maybe you can work Dovescape into the mix somehow, I don't know. But there are a lot of obscure, expensive, and powerful enchantments in Modern. The only question is how to get them in the graveyard and how to return them, and we've kind of answered half of that question now.
Yeah, I was looking, there's like Oath of Jace in addition to like Unmarked Grave, which can find any of these that aren't legendary, but I don't know if all the cards are quite there yet. It's just very striking the rate of return on this card in terms of how little it costs to suspend and how fast it comes off its suspend.
Yeah, I don't know if one of those enchantments is meant to be as foretold now, because it just lets you cast this, and then I don't know if you want to work other stuff that works with as foretold into that mix there, and then you have Sterling Grove, Idyllic Tutor, so I just don't know holistically what this deck is really meant to look like.
I think Starfield and Nyx has to be involved, right? That's the redundant way to recur things, and then your eventual win condition if this goes big.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I will leave it to people other than me to figure this one out and piece it together. Let's move on to another curious build around here. This is Harmonic Prodigy. So this is 1 and a red for a 1/3 prowess, and whenever a shaman or another wizard would trigger... I'll get the exact wording here because it is important. So if an ability of a shaman or another wizard you control triggers, that ability triggers an additional time. So you're looking at prowess triggers on other creatures, notably not Monastery Swiftspear, which is a monk and not a shaman or a wizard. But Soulscar Mage, for instance, would be eligible with this, or some of the other prowess creatures too. But I think if this shows up anywhere, it's more likely to be as a way to double some kind of good enters the battlefield trigger, or some other triggered ability where this card really lets you just do a bunch of stuff at very low cost.
There is the Naru Meha Infinite combo where you like get the copy stuff twice and flicker it or whatever. I know that existed with
Naban?
Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah,
I mean, I guess you have 8 Nabans now, and you play Naru Meha and so on. I think the issue there, and I have done the Skyfall search already, so saving all of you out there some time on this one, is that there are just not that many good wizards in Modern, and especially not good wizards at a low point on the curve that have abilities that work well with this, and that really is the death blow to any kind of nascent Harmonic Prodigy deck, I think.
You do draw 2 cards off Elvish Visionary, return 2 permanents off Eternal Witness.
Yeah.
I don't have a lot
Wizard.
of other...
Give me Patron Wizard, you cowards, and then maybe we can put something together.
How would you feel about doubling Fanatic emojis? Is that too much?
I would feel good about it, but that doesn't seem remotely realistic to me.
Okay. Yeah, it's just like a weird text line. I don't think the shaman version of this has existed before.
No, you usually have these creature types being fairly siloed, where you have wizards over here and then shamans over here, and each of them has their own tribal effects, and now we're crossing those streams for the first time, really, I think. So maybe some interesting design space being explored. I don't know if with the upcoming D&D set, if Warlock is going to work its way into the mix there. We've had some Warlocks showing up in recent sets, but something to keep an eye out for. Let's move on to Sanctum Weaver. So this is an homage to Sarah's Sanctum, and somehow one of the more subtle homages in this set, which is not big on subtlety outside of the card named Subtlety for the most part. But this is a 1 and a green mana creature is kind of understating it. It's a 1 and a green 0/2. It's an enchantment itself, so enchantment creature Dryad, and it taps to add X mana of any one color, where X is the number of enchantments you can draw. So at its base, it is a Birds of Paradise, and then work any other enchantments into the mix, and the mana production scales up quite nicely.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out if, like, I guess this just goes off with Freed from the Real. That's kind of the big thing it does, right?
That is infinite already.
Yeah, it's just like a really good rate for what it does. I don't have a lot more to say about it. It just scales absurdly fast and well in terms of just putting your deck onto the battlefield while all your other Enchantress cards put your deck into your hand.
Yeah, and we do have an Enchantress sub-theme in this set where you see Sterling Grove, Solitary Confinement, which I went on a rant about before, but then also Enchantress's Presence making its way into the format for the first time, and also a new Enchantress in the form of this green-white Enchantress. I'll bring the name up here. And so that one it doesn't have hexproof, so none of the inbuilt protection on Argothian Enchantress, but whenever you play an enchantment spell, you gain a life and you draw a card. So if you can protect either of those engine pieces, then you can get something nice going with a Sithis Harvest Hand. There we go. But I don't know. It feels like these creatures are fairly fragile, and you kind of need them to survive to really do anything. And so you end up in the kind of like devoted druid problem of you build your whole deck around this one piece, and then you have to put a lot of effort into protecting that, and then also have these specific other cards to work with that card to have it do anything. And at that point, you can't really fill the deck out with anything else, as far as I can tell.
So the two things that I'll say that might change your mind. One, we'll start simple. There's a lot of 1 mana equivalents of Freed from the Real to go off with. Thassa's Ire, Crab Umbra. You can even go off with Singing Bellstrike with this card.
Okay. Yeah.
But also Sterling Grove exists. So it's a lot less of an issue to keep alive a random enchantment creature, because you know, if you have a Sterling Grove, it can't die to Lightning Bolt.
That is appealing. That's a good start. The one issue, though, is that Sterling Grove, it doesn't give enchantments hexproof, it gives them Shroud. So that does prevent you, if the shields are up on Sterling Grove, you now can't put an aura on your own creature. So that could be an issue.
Well, that's why you can always sacrifice the Sterling Grove at the right time.
Sure.
But yeah,
sure.
I mean, that could just be, you know, the infinite combo is the kind of thing you have a little bit of it in your deck is just kind of the actual end game. Whereas, like, if you just have Sterling Grove and Sithis and Sanctum, why am I blanking on Sanctum Weaver just together on the battlefield going off, you probably don't necessarily need to go infinite if you're actually preventing your opponent from interacting. The infinite is probably just the kind of thing you use to close when your opponent being unable to interact isn't actually going to close out the game.
And talking about the Enchantresses in that Enchantress shell for a second, the first point you want to look there is what good 1 mana enchantments are there in the format. And off the top of my head, in these colors, you have Utopia Sprawl and I believe Wild Growth, right? If you want to, you don't have Wild Growth. Okay, so that automatically now I am a little less enthusiastic. But we have seen Utopia Sprawl do some good work in the past, so worth a look there perhaps. And then on the white side of things, we have On Thin Ice in the first Modern Horizons as a good 1-drop removal spell that notably we've seen people just turn to this in lieu of Path of Exile or Out or some other options, because it is a permanent answer for the most part that doesn't give them anything back. And that is a card which is just very on plan for any kind of Enchantress deck.
Yeah, I'm just looking through the search real fast, and Abundant Growth is another pretty common one to see. That fits very well in this deck. I would probably not want to mix it with Deafening Silence, but that card is extremely powerful if that's the hate card you want for the matchup.
Sure, and I guess there is a lot of good hate cards or hate effects attached to enchantments. So rest in peace, Stony Silence was the duo from the very beginning of Modern, and then we have a few other ones as well. So actually, the more we talk about this, the more I'm cautiously optimistic that something in the space might be able to work.
Yeah, just a couple other notables as I'm, again, just reading off the search. Mana Bloom, recursive enchantment there. Myth Realized is an alternate kill condition. Oath of Nisa. There's a lot of... Porphyry Nodes. That card is serious business. But yeah, you had made a note that you were like, is this actually good if the hate enchantments aren't good? And my answer is no, but like, that's totally fine for the stacks deck to exist in this kind of space where it is a stacks deck, but like also has a proactive engine to take care of some of the stuff that it doesn't quite cover.
Yeah, this is a deck that really would want actual replenish instead of the tricky suspend one, but you take what you can get, I suppose. And you do still have Starfield to kind of do something in that same role.
Yeah, if this deck ends up being good, I think I am excited about what that means about the Modern format.
Yeah, I think it's a good bellwether for where the format is going. The one other thing which snuck into the end of the spoiler and then to the end of this list of the spoilers here is Goblin and Archomancer. So this is a new familiar, I suppose, or a new mashup with Goblin and Electromancer. This is red-green for a 2/2, and red or green creatures or red or green spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. So immediately this points you in the direction of a new type of Storm deck, one that gets to play maybe stuff like Burgi or Grinning Ignis, or you're not as limited as you were with stuff like Baral or Electromancer, and so that opens up a lot more space for you.
Yeah, I haven't thought through all the implications, but it's definitely on the list of like, well, I gotta actually do some searches for this one.
Yeah, one thing that stands out in red-green is regrowth from the first Modern Horizons, where if you have some other thing that's netting you mana or cards, now you get to like chain that effect over and over again. Maybe there's some kind of... I guess Reforger Soul is the only real draw 7 we have, and that's not quite it, I think. So I have to get into the lab on that one, but a card to keep in mind for sure. I do wonder as well if with Ignoble Hierarch and now this, if there is some kind of red-green Goblins deck that we can piece together. Possibly.
As soon as you said Reforge the Soul of the green cards, I thought about Noxious Revival, and then I've just been sitting here thinking about that for a minute. Yeah, I also completely forgot Regrowth was in the format. So that was news to me.
Easy one to miss. It hasn't showed up in any deck list as far as I can tell in the past 2 years. So maybe time for that one to have those shoots breaking through the surface once more.
Yeah, I'm interested to see if Storm can kind of, or these sort of whatever you want to call them, combo decks can break away from their traditional kind of bindings.
Yeah, so some interesting new hits from this set, and we'll take a short break, and when we'll come back, we'll talk about some of the reprints, which I think really are poised to make a mark in the Modern format now.
What's up, everyone? Justin Parnell here,
along with Ryan Overturf, and we want to tell you about the single best podcast on the SCG network.
Well, obviously, Ryan, you're talking about the 540.
Indeed I am, and that is the best podcast because we talk about the best format in the history of Magic.
Cube Draft?
Cube Draft.
Every week we go over all things Cube.
We're talking about in-depth reviews of brand new cards.
The best ways to draft and think about Arena and Magic Online Cube formats,
as well as ways to play with your friends,
and ways to play with your enemies.
Also some ways to make your friends into your enemies.
And cardboard takes of a variety of temperatures.
So if you're a fan of structured nonsense,
or if you hate it,
either way, all the same, check out the 540 every week wherever you find your podcasts, and right here on StarCityGames.com.
All right, and we're back to talk through some of the new to Modern reprints, but many of which have a long pedigree in Constructed and a fond place in my heart. So let's open up that discussion quickly with Riptide Laboratory. So this is a land that taps for colorless, and it has 1 and a blue, tap to return target wizard you control to its owner's hand. And if you played, extended 10 years ago, or I guess in some spots before that too, you will remember being locked by this card in conjunction with Events of Shaper Savant, Vendilion Clique, Sewer of Temptation, Glenalendra Archmage, Spellstutter Sprite. So a lot of good cards to pair with this, but I'm not confident that any of those have really aged all that well in Modern here in this decade.
I don't think they really have, but that doesn't matter because there's a card that didn't exist back then that is just perfect with this, and that's Snapcaster Mage. I don't think you need a lot of like, you're just like, oh, my deck was going to have 4 Snapcaster Mages anyways. I can play a Riptide Lab, and if this ever happens, my opponent is absolutely miserable for the rest of forever.
Yeah, there is a case that with Counterspell now and stuff like Armage's Charm and Cryptic Command, the cost of a colorless land is higher now than it has been in the past. This is where that blue Urborg would come in handy, by the way, if Wizards wants to throw these people another bone. But I think this is a one-off that you put in your blue deck to pair the Snapcaster Mage. If you can justify the cost, or maybe even if you can't, maybe you're getting a little greedy. But I don't know if this is going to be the long game by itself of a deck the way that it was many years ago.
No, I would not want to base my deck entirely around this. I would not play Spellstutter Sprite, though I guess I could convince myself to play Events or Vendilion Click. But just that, like I said, that Snapcaster equity is so high. It is worth thinking about whether this set makes you really want to condense from the 3-color control decks down to a 2-color one. This is just another card on top of Counterspell, on top of Choose Your Incarnation, that kind of stuff. So put some thought into that before building Riptide Lab deck.
Mm-hmm. One card that I know we will have a lot to say about is Shardless Agent. So this is 3 mana for a 2/2 with Cascade, and that's it by itself. But there's a lot of bells and whistles on this card, which could maybe lead you astray.
Yeah, so I did try this for a while in the Glimpse of Tomorrow deck, where it was like, oh, well, this is 2 permanents. You could hit a Glimpse. It was not good there. The artifact stuff I had going on with it in Urza was not good, and I ended up just cutting it from the deck entirely. I think you just want to be playing a mostly fair game with this card right now. I think I like Temur over Sultai with it, though, in this format.
Yeah, it's a weird one to evaluate because if we had no frame of reference for this card and it just showed up on the spoiler, then I think people would really be thrown and taken aback by it. As it stands, it has existed in Legacy and other formats for many, many years, and it's a kind of card which you are kind of surprised did not make its way into Modern already. But we have that history to work with in terms of where this might go. But I wonder if that might lead people astray because of contextual factors in other formats that maybe aren't in play here. So, for example, we have the Shardless Barg, or I guess Shardless Sultai these days deck that Jerry Thompson and others won a lot of money with back in 2013, 2014. I don't know if that template really translates all that well over to Modern, where your disruptive pieces are a little bit more conditional. So, there will be a lot of times where you draw Thoughtseize and your opponent's empty-handed, or Fatal Push is either the best card in your deck or the worst, and you can just about get away with that with Bloodbraid Elf in Jund, although I think that card is aging increasingly poorly too, because a 3/2 body is a good kind of, with haste no less, is a good buyout for that, whereas Grey Ogre is not for the most part. That's not going to be a good consolation prize. And then you don't have Brainstorm to set up your draws there. I guess you could, well, I was going to say, we've seen people try the kind of black-green base, splashing blue for stuff like Snapcaster Mage or whatever in the past, but that card also pairs quite poorly with Shardless Agent. So I don't know if you can make a blue Jund deck of sorts, where you're just playing this kind of grindy mid-range game, and then you put Shardless Agent in there. What I think you can do is build a fair deck from the ground up with Shardless Agent in mind, and this is a shell that I'm actually fairly excited about for week 1 of this new Modern.
Yeah, I think if you're playing cards that actually have mana costs, Renin 6, pretty great card, and that's the reason I wanted to be Temur. I want to be able to hit like Renin 6 off of this. I want to put Ancestral Visions in my deck. I want Lightning Bolt in my deck, and then I want my counter spells to be Archmage's Charm and Cryptic Command that are further up the curve than this is going to hit.
And your other threats are they Tarmogoyf from this scenario, or do you have something else in mind?
Yeah, probably just Tarmogoyf. Nothing really wrong with that one.
Yeah. What you can do if you really want to push the needle is you can build a fair Cascade deck. So if Crashing Footfalls is the only eligible Cascade target, then between Shardless Agent and Violent Outburst, or even Ardent Plea if you want to stretch to that too, you have a fairly consistent way to generate 8 to 10 power spread across multiple bodies on the third turn. And then you can back that up with the Incarnations, the grief cycle from this set, with Force of Negation, Force of Vigor. You get the adventure creatures like Brazen Borrower and Bonecrusher Giant. You get Fire Ice now, a new split card entering Modern for the first time, which a lot of people will be excited to see. And with all of that in mind, yeah, you lose out on stuff like Lightning Bolt, but you can build a good fair deck where what you get in return for artificially raising your curve is one of the best finishers you could possibly ask for.
Yeah, this was one of the aspiring Spike's been churning out decks, and this was one of the first ones he put out, and I was just like, oh, why haven't we done this before? And that is, I really want to start with this deck because it also is one of the decks that best abuses an overload of free spells because you can't cascade into Subtlety or Force of Negation.
Exactly, and I think the answer to why didn't we do this before is Charlotte's Agent keeping you in 3 colors and being a 2/2 is just such an upgrade over Ardently that really does move the needle there. And what we can do is we can build a Cascade deck with the old tricks that we know and love. So you can build Blue Living End now, which was already seeing some success in Strixhaven Modern, with up to 12 Cascade cards, or just keep it in the team of colors and have much more consistent mana and still have 8 good Cascade creatures or 8 good Cascade cards. I guess you could go behind the third door and go into Bant, where you have 8 Cascaders, but all of those pitch to Force Negation and Subtlety, so you get some nice overlap on your colors there. But you really now have a lot more room to maneuver with that shell. And yeah, you could build this Living End deck with 12 one-card payoffs, basically, and a bunch of cyclers to help you find them. And at that point, your deck is hyper-consistent, and there's really nothing in conventional means that most decks can use to really interact with you well.
Yeah, I'm interested to see if that is actually the deck that does something broken outside of free spells. I mean, I guess technically some different kind of free spells, but there's not a lot of stuff that feels outright broken from this set, and that might be the one other thing aside from Ephemerating Grief that feels like it's in the right range.
And that's a pointer for what you might want to look for when it comes to a set like this, where it can be kind of daunting looking at the spoiler, where you have all of these weird and wacky new cards, and weirder and wackier now than maybe in any other set that we've seen before, and also a bunch of reprints making their way into Modern. And some of those will spawn new decks by themselves, but often the biggest impact is going to be, well, now I have the third copy effectively of some old effect, and that redundancy is what pushes some old strategy over the line.
Yeah, and I think something I've said a lot over the last few months is people constantly underrate color shifting of existing good effects. It was first Sedgemoor Witch giving all these decks that aren't red a Young Pyromancer, and then we talked about Murktide Regent, our preview card, yet again. You don't have to be playing black for Tombstalker. Shardless Agent is just another case of that where you don't have to be playing 4-color to have all these Cascaders. You can be either 3-color combo.
Absolutely. So Shardless Agent, I think you could also put it in some kind of aggressive deck where I've seen people building around the general, the 1 red-white 3/1 that whenever you play a multicolor spell, you get a 4/4 golem, and Shardless Agent is multicolored itself, and then if you cascade into another gold spell, then you're getting a nice return there. I don't know if you're already getting clogged up with 3-drops in this deck, if you have the General and Shardless Agent, and I assume you want something like Mantis Rider or Guide to Saintcraft as well. Your curve is pretty high at that point, but maybe you can make it work. Also, one of the more innocuous parts of this whole card here is the human type line, where again, humans has more 3-drops than they can shake a stick at, including Mantis Rider and Imperial Recruiter, which we'll get onto next. But a human that cascades into another human can help your damage output too.
Possibly. I'm skeptical that at that rate you want to be accidentally casting this and finding an Ether Vial, but maybe some slightly different list.
Okay, change of plan, but we're not doing that anymore. We can do any of these other broken things with Shardless Agent instead.
Talk to me about Imperial Recruiter, because that one I am in a similar space of I don't quite know what to do with it.
Yeah, so it's kind of weird to give a non-flippant answer to the question. It just finds creatures with power 2 or less. But when you think about what that encompasses in the modern format, it's actually a very wide range of things. And crucially, if you compare this to Recruiter of the Guard, which if you told me one of these effects was entering Modern, I would have said that one would have been more likely. And that one is a toughness 2 or less. Power 2 or less opens up a lot more of these build around flagship creatures that decks end up getting named after, because if you're printing a card like Yawgmoth or Urza, for example, or let's say the Academy manufacturer from this set, then you want to have those have more defensive stats, I think, because you want them to win the game by doing their thing, by doing their cool, unique ability, rather than just attacking for a boatload of damage. And then also you want them to have slightly higher toughness so that they're less vulnerable to stuff like Lightning Bolt, which might render them unviable otherwise. And so when you bear that in mind and you kind of do these different searches for power versus toughness, there's a lot of cards which fall under the remit of Imperial Recruiter, but not under, I guess, Militia Bugler was what we had to play before, or Recruiter of the Guard. And so, one of the decks that I built was the Manufactor Urza deck with Collector Company and Imperial Recruiter, where with all of those effects in mind, you have a lot of consistent access to Manufactor and Urza, and even if you don't have some specific piece, you usually have a draw that can do a lot of something, whether or not that's worth doing. But then there's other stuff like Karma Guide is in this set, and there are a bunch of infinite combos you can do with 2 copies of Karma Guide, or Karma Guide plus Priest of Felrights, the 2/2 reanimation creature, is a nice loop as well. So there's just a ton of stuff you can do, which wasn't really consistent enough before, and having 4 guaranteed tutors for one of those pieces that itself is a creature. So you can do stuff like Imperial Recruiter for Felidar Guardian, Guardian blinks the Recruiter, that finds Kiki-Jiki, and then Kiki-Jiki can copy Guardian. So that's a 1-card way to assemble that whole combo, and that's very clunky. It takes a lot of time, but just having that option in your deck gives you this new dimension that you can play towards. And in particular with something like Ephemerate, where one of the aspiring Spike decks that called on briefly was this Auriok Champion, Felidar Guardian kind of looping deck to gain infinite life, where Imperial Recruiter finds all the pieces of that combo, but is also just a great Ephemerate target or a great Felidar Guardian target. So this is one of those unsung hero cards where it by itself is not doing anything too impressive, but it finds you the stuff that does, and that's what's important there.
So we talked a bit about Karma Guide and those infinite combos, and you mentioned that it's this set is hostile to graveyards. But how hostile is this set and the card Solitude to like this idea of like controlling a relevant creature that you spent mana on?
I think it's a little. I think it's still fairly hostile to that. I mean, there is good removal in the set. There is good free removal in the set. So you can't really take any aspect of that for granted. But you can also, against some of this heavy duty graveyard hate, Imperial Recruiter can find the Wisp Bear for their Rest in Peace, let's say, or with some of these creature equivalents, maybe the Flametongue Yearling, that 2/2 mini Flametongue Carvu to shoot that down and then go on with your day.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing is that if you're ever Imperial recruiting for like Felidar Guardian and they're trying to break it up with Solitude, you're just generating a lot of things on the battlefield along the way, and it's hard to come out ahead in that exchange.
I will say, I'm very glad that this isn't Recruiter of the Guard, because that card does fetch Solitude, and I do not want to have to face that down, except in Legacy, but I'm sure I will have to at some point.
Yeah, good luck, Legacy players. I guess all the Delver players deserve it, so whatever.
Well, all the Delver players got at least 2, possibly 3 new broken threats with this set, as they do in every set, so, they can take their licks there, I'm sure. But let's move on to another iconic reprint joining Modern for the first time here, and that's Vindicate, which I think this card, maybe more so than any other, it speaks for itself. It does exactly what it says on the tin, and that usually is pretty damn good.
Yeah, no, this card's just great. I don't have a lot to say about it. I think that it is hard to state how much better it is than like a Maelstrom Pulse because of how good Destroy Target Land can be. Like, think about like a Maelstrom Pulse where like 15% of the time the game ends instead of like destroying a permanent. So
Right, and there are so many cards in the set which are weirded in such a strange way, just to take aim at Tron specifically. It seems like, where you have the Break the Ice card, which it hits snowlands or lands that produce colorless mana, if any of those happen to come to mind, or the Obsidian Firemaw, I think it is, which kind of does a similar thing. And I think this card is just a better Tron hate card, so to speak, than any one of those, because all of those are so narrow that you can't justify putting them in your deck. Whereas this, it does a little bit of something against everyone. And so if your Mardu midrange deck gets paired up against Tron, well, now you do have main deckable cards that can start going over after their lands, and you don't have to resort to stuff like Pillage anymore.
Yeah, I think a lot of this, we have mentioned this a couple times, but the best thing possible for any like Death and Taxes deck is being able to not play Leonin Arbiter, and you can now just like put Vindicate in your deck and just kill their lands and just like not play cards like Leonin Arbiter and Ghost Quarter to do it. You can just like, I will destroy that land. I have spent my card and it's going to my graveyard. We're going to proceed with the game from here.
Hey, you can always pitch your Arbiter to Solitude, I suppose, if you need a dead card there. But we can move on to cards that need a bit more unpacking, I suppose. And one of those cards is a personal favorite of mine, Titania, Protector of Argoth. So this is 3GG for a 5/3. When Titania enters the battlefield, you can return a land from your graveyard to the battlefield, and whenever a land you control would die, I suppose, you create a 5/3 green elemental. And so it might be hard to pass, especially when you don't have the card in front of you thinking about what this card can do, but consider a very basic sequence here of, you play Titania, you get back Ghost Quarter, you Ghost Quarter your own Flag Zones, so the Ghost Quarter dies, you get a 5/3, the Flag Zones dies, you get another 5/3, and then the Flag Zones dying fetches you another land. So that's a pretty formidable battlefield presence by itself, and of course, because this is a modern deck, you're going to have a bunch of fetch lands and other lands that can bend themselves in some way. And this is even before you get into what this card can do with stuff like Zuran Orb, which is in this set, Greater Gargadon. No Sylvan Safekeeper, unfortunately. I was really hoping for that one to sneak its way into modern this time around. But there's more than enough that you can do with this card, so I don't think we'll be missing that one too much.
Yeah, I have not played a game with or against this card, despite it having existed for a while. And I think I am just going to have someone cast it against me to really judge how good it is.
Yeah, I think this is the card that maybe could revive the green-white Elvish Reclaimer Ram deck, where you already want to have some of this Flag Zones Ghost Quarter stuff, and then you can get to this faster than you could get to Primeval Titan, and especially in conjunction with Dryad of the Elysian Grove. If you have Valakut, then you get up to 5 easily. This gets you back a fetch land. That's a trigger. You sacrifice it again. That's another set of triggers. So very easy to stitch all of that together. And one interaction that I've heard referred to as a Splinter triplet situation is this and Zuran Orb with Urza Saga. So I don't think Zuran Orb is where your mind first goes with that card, but with that final chapter fetching Zuran Orb, you have access to that card without needing to put a bunch of otherwise mostly dead copies in your deck. And then you can pair that with Titania, which can get back the Urza Saga, which even without the Zuran Orb, as you mentioned, that you have this kind of Squadron Hawk situation with Urza Saga where over time, you're making a bunch of constructs and then you can fetch like an expedition map or something. So very easy to create this kind of a cascading advantage that has to be dealt with in some way.
Yeah, that all makes sense. I think my question just comes down to like, do I want to be casting a 5-mana creature that is not like, this is not Primeval Titan, and I don't know how close it is or isn't. And that's what I'll just have to see after the first couple times it's cast against me.
Absolutely. So we mentioned Karma Guide in passing, not too much to add on top of that, I think. Beyond that, the reprints for the set, there's some fringe stuff which could go in various toolboxes, like a Bone Shredder, for example, kind of a nice lower mana value alternative to Shriekmaw, so that gets it in range of stuff like Unearth or Collected Company, Eldritch Evolution as well. And then, Curse Totem, if your Word of Invention deck really needs a way to host Heliod, for example, then maybe this becomes the go-to there. And then stuff like Seal of Cleansing, Seal of Removal, just these familiar effects under a new form, and being in that new form gives them other applications. So if there is an Enchantress deck, for example, I guess you already had Seal of Primordium, but maybe Seal of Removal adds something new.
Yeah, also just those are in the range of things you can cast off Lurrus. Seal of Cleansing is in a Lurrus color where Seal of Primordium isn't. That's really what flagged my attention on those two cards.
And then one fan favorite, I guess from one side of the table, if not the other, is Braid's Cabal Minion. So this is 2 black for a 2/2. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player sacrifices an artifact, a creature, or a land. And so if you have had the good fortune not to play against this card yet, one of the common play patterns is they play Braids, and then you go to your upkeep and immediately have to sacrifice something. If you haven't developed your board yet, that's likely to be a land. And at that point, you're kind of in the hard lock, where unless you can remove Braids instantly, you're never getting above whatever number of lands you have now. And if they have any way to press that advantage at all, then you're mostly locked out of the game from that point.
Yeah, I just think it's really easy to have this card accidentally end up in a sideboard in this format where you just like cast it turn 3 against a deck that is supposed to be trying to interact with your stuff, and then just like if they didn't have it right then, it's over because they're just so far behind.
Yeah, your Yawgmoth deck gets to evolution a Strangleroot Geist into this or something and just really put them to the test.
Yeah. The effect of Braids when it is actually good against your opponent is just really brutal and worth keeping in mind. It's not the kind of thing I would just put in any deck, though. Maybe the format could shape up such that it's going to be good against everybody, but I think that it is just a very powerful tool to leverage against people who are not quite ready to sacrifice a bunch of permanents.
Yeah, so between this week and last week and the week before, I think we've covered basically everything from this set. Fingers crossed. Is there anything that you think has slipped through the cracks that we need to be aware of?
Oh, gosh. I hope no, but maybe yes. I guess we'll see in a week.
Yeah, I'm very excited for the first league decklist dump with this new set, just to really pour over that. That's going to be an absolute goldmine for sure. For now, though, I think that covers all of the individual cards we want to talk about. We'll take a short break, and when we get back, we'll take a more big picture view of this set and what we think it might do to the modern format.
You've been listening to me and Dom talk about Modern Horizons 2 previews, and if you want to get your sets of those lined up, StarCityGames.com has you covered. Check out StarCityGames.com/previews to pre-order Modern Horizons 2 singles and sealed product. Whether it's the normal version of cards, a draft set, or something fancier and the packs those versions come in, we've got it posted. This list keeps updating as more previews come on in, so keep an eye on StarCityGames.com/previews so you can snag the latest previews dropping from Modern Horizons 2.
Okay, so we have spent many hours now talking about the combined impact of cards from Modern Horizons 2 and the decks that might get powered up and so on and so forth. What conclusions have you drawn? And then we can get into maybe our called shots, our top 8 rankings for this set.
My big conclusion is just kind of like the two stories are what decks received a new appropriately costed piece to maybe let them compete with the other like reasonably fair decks that have been really all that we've seen in Modern the last few months. And then what's going to happen with all the free spells. And by that, I mean the grief cycle. So those are kind of the two competing stories for me in terms of this set's impact on the format.
Yeah, I think for me, it's I don't see a Hogak. I don't see an Archam's Astrolabe. I worry about how much I'm going to enjoy Modern playing against stuff like Grief and Solitude all the time, but I guess we'll wait to find out there. I am a little disappointed that some of the stuff wasn't pushed more, like I said. I don't think there is a kind of a flagship Delirium card in the set, other than this uncommon 1-drop, which I guess you could build some kind of aggressive Delver or Shadow deck around, but there's no there's no Delirium rare, or there's no like self-discard rare, which is the theme in blue-black, where I look at that and think, all right, that's getting the wheels turning. How can I do that? And that's a little bit of a disappointment. But by and large, I think this deck is full of, or this set, is full of really fascinating cards that literally could not go in any other set, basically. So this is where they had to be. Very glad that they're here. And then also, a really good roster of reprints coming to Modern for the first time. This was something which I think the first Modern Horizons got right by and large, and this time around it's building on that to a whole new level. So I'd love to see that as well.
Yeah, a lot of the best cards in the set are reprints, but like ones that aren't necessarily seeing play in other formats. You're not getting the Wastelands or the Brainstorms or whatever, where it's just like Modern's another format with that. You're getting the cards that are just like, well, this card was good in the past, isn't good anywhere now. Let's see if it hits here. And a lot of those are good enough that they will hit here. Okay,
so with that in mind, let's try and play Nostradamus here. What are our top 8s, and how do we want to do this? Do we want to go, I give my 8th, you give your 8th, or how do we want to count this down?
I think that's the traditional way to do it. And, I had an honorable mention. We can kind of skip that. We already talked about hard evidence, so we can jump right into the 8-1 countdown.
All right, so I will let you do the honors and kick us off here.
Okay, I have Blazing Root Walla, which is red for a 1/1 with red +2/+0 until end of turn. Activate this only once a turn, and Madness is 0. This is kind of the card that in this set is most likely to be the why did they print this card in 5 to 10 years? It's where we talked about the free spell points of the set. This is the other free spell that they've put a lot of power points into. It is a very powerful piece to add to a lot of synergies. It is a very efficient way to clock up extra damage in a similar style to Hollow One. It works with Vengevine, and it's just like the fundamentally broken card where I'm not sure if the decks are there yet, but they sure will be someday.
I would love to talk myself into having that card on my list, but I think the supporting cast isn't quite there yet, and if a Madness deck is going to work, and especially some kind of Vengevine-centric Madness deck, a Basking Root Walla of some description is exactly what that deck wants, but it also wants a Putrid Imp, a Faithless Losing, and I wish that card was there. I'm just not seeing yet, so hopefully we get to check back in a few months, and I retrospectively get to add this card to my list. But for me, my number 8, we're going all the way up to Mythic here. I'm going to have Grist, the 3-mana Golgari Planeswalker. I think this card is unique for what it does. 3-mana Planeswalkers that can defend themselves and build towards some other goal at the same time. That's a fantastic recipe already for a card to do well, regardless of what the abilities are. And this one has abilities at a price to move. I think I expect to see this card showing up a decent amount. The thing that keeps it at the bottom of this list instead of towards the top is I don't know if this is the type of Magic that you want to be playing in Modern Horizons 2 Modern, especially in week 1, where people are trying all of the weird and wacky stuff, and I'm sure a bunch of bizarre combo decks will be showing up and so on. It may be that this kind of fair on the board Magic is just the wrong thing to be doing, and if that's the case, then you need the rest of your deck to fill in the gaps there.
I didn't have this one on my list because it just takes a lot for a 3-drop to reach the actually most relevant cards in the set for me. Even if it sees play, I don't think it's going to be groundbreaking or anything like that.
Okay, so what was at number 7 on your list?
I had Abundant Harvest, just kind of like the, playing it safe. It's a cheap cantrip. It's hard to undersell this, it's just going to be good.
Yeah, this for me is the, oh god, why didn't we have that one at number 1 the whole time candidate for this set? And that was the honorable mention on my list, actually. So I will have more guilt there than you if it does come down to that before too long. For me, at number 7, I had Sanctum Prelate, which was a card that I almost forgot to put on my list of honorable mentions entirely, because that was the first thing that we knew from the set, and we discussed it so early on that somehow it slipped my mind. But coming full circle here, I expect this card to show up a lot in Modern, and there are decks that, as currently configured, just really cannot beat this card if there's anything else going on. And those decks may need to adapt or die if the shells that could make good use of Prelate become popular. I think as well, when you have stuff like Imperial Recruiter, this is one of the strengths of the card that I highlighted in my article, is there are so many just good hate bears now where, you can get your Sanctum Prelate, you can get your Sanctifier, you can get your whatever it is, and expect that to be a one-hit KO against particular opponents. And there are a lot of opponents where this card really puts them to the test in a big way.
Yeah, I had this card at number 4. I think you're even underselling how much this card is going to one-hit KO people and make entire archetypes have to warp their deck. It's really good.
It is. The thing holding me back is this snapshot of Modern that we had coming in where Is It Prowess was 20-25% of every Modern tournament. With that baseline, yeah, Prelate is an absolute all-star. If the format takes this very creature-centric turn, which I don't know how likely that even is, but I could see a world where this is a sideboard card as opposed to a main deck card for the time being.
That's fair. I just think it's still going to be one of the best sideboard cards possible against such a huge range of stuff that I can't put it any lower.
Yeah, there are so many decks where this is your Rest in Peace or your Stony Silence, right? And against some of those decks, this can stand in for those cards, right? Like if KCI were still around somehow, you know, there are various combo decks where this is just the card they want to see least in perhaps the entire format.
Yeah, and just how flexible it is to shutting down certain aspects of the format is just really a big deal for me. Moving on up to my number 6, I have Shardless Agent. This was the card I guess I almost forgot Sanctum Prelate as well because it's not actually on the Wizards main spoiler page. But I also kind of forgot Shardless Agent, and then in discussion decided that I had Riptide Lab here, but that was just too much nostalgia. It's not actually better than these cards. Agent does some good stuff. The fact that it's a 3-mana Cascade card, just you literally cannot ignore that. Every single 3-mana Cascade, the delta between this and Demonic Dread is big, and Demonic Dread is already just a card that exists and is always playable. So you can't move on with a top 8 without this card, I think.
Yeah, Shardless Agent was the card, or one of a tiny handful of cards that potentially would go above that line of the Incarnations for me, where just the fact that there are established decks that really lights a fire underneath and pushes those to another level. And also, I expect to see this in a wide range of decks where, yeah, some of those it won't be a good fit for, and the people who built those decks will discover that before too long, I imagine. But in terms of both breadth and depth, I think this card can really compete with any of them. So I'm not sure how I'm treating the Grief Cycle for the sake of my list here, but this card was hovering around that kind of number 2 range for me.
That's fair. The Grief Cycle is the 0 on my list. Like I said, I had 2 cards that were not there. I'm willing to believe I had Shardless Agent too low because I slotted it in late. So yeah, you can easily talk me up on that. What's your 6?
It's like when James Holzhauer was making his Meteoric Jeopardy run for the first time, and you would look at the before and after rankings of the most money earned in a single game, and before you had a good, in the top 20 it would be 18 or 19 different names on that list, and afterwards it would be 6 names on that list, and 13 of them were all James Holzhauer. And that's basically how I feel about the Incarnation cycle. You can't do a top 8 where those cards get to play a fair game because they just are the top 8 now, and nothing else gets a chance to breathe.
Yeah. What did you have at 6?
So for me at 6, I just had Imperial Recruiter, which maybe I'm putting more stock in that because I wrote my piece on it this week, and I don't know where the chicken is there and where the egg is. Did I put it highly because I wrote about it, or did I write about it because I'm high on that card and that's why I'm putting it here? Not quite sure, but either way, read that piece, I suppose, for more details on how to use that one in Modern.
That's fair. My number 5 was another reprint, just very simple, Counterspell. It doesn't really change the format a lot, but it's just going to see so much play that it's got to be good. It's got to be here, and it just does its thing so well. It is the best in class of what it does.
Yeah, I almost think this one is sneaking under the radar now, where we debated if this really was a game changer, where if you get to change your mana leaks or your logic knots into this, how much of an upgrade is that really? And I think it's a bigger upgrade than most people seem to in general, but especially in these early days where everyone is trying all the cool new stuff, having a card that just answers that cool new thing, whatever it is a really nice place to be.
I can't remember who was streaming, but they had a counter at the bottom of their stream where number of times Mana Leak was better than Counterspell and number of times Counterspell was better than Mana Leak over the course of a day. And so it was really funny. So the way I saw the screenshot was 7 times Mana Leak was better than Counterspell. And you're like, oh, that's cool. And then the Counterspell number is 35 and you're like, oh.
just astronomically higher.
Yeah.
So yeah, Counterspell, another card which kind of speaks for itself, does its thing. can't really count against it at all. Expect to see that one showing up a lot. Number 4 is, I don't know if this is an old card or a new card really, but we know this one is going to see play, and that's Ignoble Hierarch, where just this one being in these colors, there's an interesting counterfactual of if you had swapped these around, if this was the card that was in Conflux in the John Shard way back in the day, and Noble Hierarch was the card joining Modern for the first time, how the reactions would have been different, how the format would have evolved differently up until this point. But now that we have both of those, all of the decks which really needed exactly this card to make their mark now get to try and flourish in Modern.
Yeah, that's totally fair. I have it higher. I have it number 3. I think that like 3, 4, 5 for me should have been Hierarch, Prelate, Shardless Agent, and just some random order ahead of Counterspell. But like, it's going to be, this is another card where it's just like very obviously impactful, does a very obvious good thing. And I don't think I've quite thought through what the second order effects of it are quite to the same level.
Mm-hmm. So moving further out the list, what did you have in, I think number 3 we're getting to now? That was Hierarch for you. So we're getting to your number 2.
What was your 4? I think that we may have missed that unless we doubled up.
Oh, that was Ignoble Hierarch, unless I'm miscounting my own list here. But you have a card here which I did not even have on my list, and this was, I believe, when we started doing this top 8 countdown, the number 1 card on your list. So we're doing it live. We're changing things around here in real time. Yeah.
So my number 2 is Persist. Persist is 1 in a black sorcery, reanimated creature with a -1 counter on it. I just think that the delta between this and the next replacement card in the format is really crazily large, and that this effect at this power level is like close enough to a legacy level card that I have to put it this high. It's the most likely thing, one of the most likely things to break in any kind of short term. I did mention non-legendary, I think, but like, this card's really good. It's just so unique and so powerful that you were talking about cards like Shardless Agent that are likely to compete with the Grief Cycle. I have this as one of the ones just because it's so unique, and one of the things where the power is placed heavily on a unique effect in the 0 to 2 mana range that like it's just doing something that could genuinely change the format.
Yeah, if we are just looking at uniqueness, this is the card. This might even be the number 1 card in terms of what decks can exist now that this was printed that just could not exist before. This is it. This is the game changer in that sense. The reason why I should have had it on my list but didn't, but the reason why I didn't have it there was, firstly, I don't know exactly what we're bringing back with it just yet. And then secondly, there is so much graveyard hate, which it's not even that they have to care about what I'm doing. It's that they just get to put these cards in their deck and hose me almost by accident without even really trying too hard. So I don't know what I'm doing with this, and I don't know how frustrated I'm going to get in trying to do that, wading through this sea of heavy-duty graveyard hate.
That's fair, and I think that most of the Persist decks, like I said, I want to build them in such a way that if my opponent runs graveyard hate, all I lose out on is Persist and not the rest of my deck.
Okay. And so you're number 1, and the card that was vying with Shardless Agent to get above that line of the Incarnations for me, Urza Saga. One of the first cards spoiled from the set, and the one that I thought was a loud signal as to what kind of crazy was going down in Modern Horizons 2, where you look at this for the first time and you kind of double take, and then you have to read it again to make sure you actually grasp everything that's going on here. This is, I think, has the potential to be a real game changer. And there are already various decks where I think, okay, well, I put this in and it does something kind of neat. It gets the Zuran Orb for my Titania in this ramp deck, for example. And then there are other decks where this could just blow the entire ceiling off. And, if there's a card which really shifts the format in a new direction, this could be it. In the true kind of Urza pedigree from the first Modern Horizons, this could certainly follow in its footsteps.
Yep, it's again, all the 0 mana power is placed in this card. It's like everything I said about the card early on just applies. It's good value. It's powerful in a way that dodges some of the hate for a very powerful setup, gives that deck staying power, defeats trying to beat it with 1-for-1 answers. Just like a really broken card.
And the thing is, too, I don't even have a deck in mind for this just yet. So maybe it's double standards, given what I said about Persist, but I could see this being the card that brings Amulet Titan back to tier 1 status yet again, for example. Or maybe Hardened Scales gets a new lease on life with this. Or maybe there's some artifact deck which did not have a good reason to exist yet, but now absolutely does. And this is going to be the centerpiece of it.
I don't think that's really a double standard because, like, Modern just has this long history of, like, putting cheap artifacts in your deck is good. Like, there's not a history of, like, reanimating stuff being good. But, like, you can just assemble an arbitrary set of cheap artifacts, and that's probably a competitive deck with a card like Urza Saga.
This might be the nail in the coffin for any hopes of Mox Opal leaving the ban list at any point.
Yeah, I guess that's fair.
I mean, let us try, right? To see what happens. What's the worst that could go wrong, you know?
The same thing that happened before?
And the time before that, okay, that's fair. I get why they would be a little bit concerned, but just let us have our fun, you know? We've all got these playsets of Mox Opals, which did good work for a few years, and now are gathering dust in a shoebox somewhere. They want to let their freak flag fly, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, give people another cranial plating or something. They'll be happy.
Absolutely. We actually do have a cranial plating of sorts in this set, right? The Needles list.
Needles. Which card is this?
So that's the living weapon that's a cranial plating for enchantments and artifacts.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's a good point. That's cool. The difference between 1 and 2 to equip is a lot.
It certainly is not cranial plating. Maybe it has a home in like the hammer deck or something as a one of. I don't know, but we can dream, I suppose.
Yeah, that might be better for the hammer deck where it is a creature on its own. But we have pretty similar lists for the most part, and I think it kind of tells that like a lot of the power is in cards that are like obviously good or reprints where you have a known influence. I don't know if that's on us for missing stuff or just like on the design shift between Modern Horizons 1 and this set where like a lot of the power is not in like weird things that cheat your mana and are free from the graveyard.
Yeah, certainly keen to hear from people if they think we're massively overrating certain cards, underrating certain cards, if there are cards which we're not rating at all and they really ought to be on our list when they aren't. So definitely give us your feedback there. Do we want to save the decks that we're most excited about for next week when maybe those will be more fully formed?
I think it's fine to just rally off them and let people figure it out because I'd rather be out there first and let people try to build these decks if we're maybe a little off on them and then have something to talk about then.
Yeah, so I do actually, at the time of recording, have a Modern Horizons 2 kind of day one tournament scheduled for this Friday, and still trying to figure out, firstly, if I can get the cards in time for that on Magic Online, but also what to play in that. And I think my number one candidate is just going to be this Blue Living End deck, which was in contention for one of the best decks before, kind of being kept down by Heliod, which seemed to have all but disappeared at this point. And Charlotte's Agent is the exact card that deck needed and wanted. A little scared of Sanctum Prelate, not going to lie, as well as some of the graveyard hate going on in this set. But if I can dodge that, then I think that deck shapes up very nicely.
Yep, I think that deck is also good against the graveyard hate in this set. It's really just the Relic of Progenitors of the world that you're afraid of, not so much like the one-shot kind of things that this set kind of brings, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then beyond that, Domain Zoo in some capacity. I don't know if we can work the Sino Draco Territorial Kavu angle. Maybe it's that 3-mana multicolor general. There's something there, but I do not have it within my brain to figure out that mana base, so maybe I'll leave that one to others for the time being.
It's easier than you think. I did try to play Domain Zoo at a Grand Prix once. I'm not as excited about it, but I'm excited that people are excited about it.
I don't know enough to temper my own excitement here, so I'm just gonna learn my lesson the hard way, perhaps.
Fair enough. The deck I am probably most excited about, honestly, if I'm trying to be competitive and win, the two high ones are anything with Urza Saga and then the Orzhov Grief deck. I am actually excited about the Glimpse of Tomorrow's deck I wrote about, though. I think that deck is like on the right track and has a very powerful core engine to it. I don't know if the Magic Online token limit supports it, but we'll see.
Okay. Is it ineligible for Nonsense of the Week if you created the deck? If this one shows up in the first 5-0 decklist dump?
Yeah, I think that's the putting the medal on your own neck kind of meme, and that's just not going to fly.
If you had to pick one of the Urza Saga decks to call your shot more specifically, which one would that be?
I don't actually know, and I'm pretty sure it involves the card Urza, because you're just trying to distance yourself from the traditional like artifact vulnerabilities as much as possible, while still getting as much of that raw power as you can.
That would be a flavor win at the very least. For my part, I'm going to try that card in Amulet Titan, and hopefully that is as busted as it seems like it could be, and that's just easy mode. I get to play the deck I at least have some experience with, but I just can't create hardened scales. I'm sorry. I don't know if, like we spoke about the Wasp at great length. I don't know if that's even the best one-drop modular card in the set, or even in like the top 2 or 3. So Arcbound Roker has some stiff competition now, or maybe some new friends. Maybe that's what it needed.
Yeah, I think you're probably going to end up still playing Worker just because your deck still wants Inkmoth Nexus and the colorless mana is just so important. But I am interested to see the Mouser and the Javelineer show up in lists.
Yeah, Urza Saga fetching the Ozolith could be a thing. You know, that's a nice little target there. Welding Jar, I suppose, as well. We got we need some protection, certainly. And then beyond that, I think just plain old humans might actually be a good thing to revisit now. We have so many good new humans. Sand and Prelate by itself would have been a big pickup. And then also, if we're building decks around all of these weird and wacky new cards, Meddling Mage just starts to look a lot more appealing too.
Yeah, again, there's a lot more decks that are going to be named after a card, at which point Meddling Mage becomes a good card.
Yeah, and I think the one of the things that gives me hope from this set is it's not so much what gained new cards as what didn't. So if we were coming in here and saying, the biggest beneficiaries from this set are Izzet Prowess and Dredge and Heliod, then that would be some cause for concern. But by and large, those decks did not really gain anything as far as I can tell. I guess Sanctum Prelate in Heliod could be a welcome pickup, and maybe Prowess tries to reconfigure itself around some of these new cheap threats. But by and large, I think it's more of a case of a rising tide coming up to the level rather than them just continuing to be on top by themselves.
Yeah. I'm interested to see whether the other option is that the turnover and people playing more decks could just make those decks good again, because like people stop focusing on beating Heliod with all these weird combo decks and then just get beat by Heliod being so good. But, at least there's some hope.
Yeah, and I think that's fine if it's a once in a tournament, 5% of the metagame kind of thing, as opposed to one of these decks at any given time exerting some kind of stranglehold over the format.
That's very fair. And it may just be that we get some time before anything strangleholds the format, and that is good enough.
Yeah, we may just get a totally new Hogak or Simic Urza where we wish we were under the reign of Heliod or Izzet Prowess again. But for now, I think that the signs are more promising. I'm going to be cautiously optimistic there.
Yeah, I even had Rakdos Sacrifice as one of my like low tier decks to look at. So like, if that's something I'm considering, it has to be a good sign.
Okay, well, what do you have in mind there?
I haven't thought much further than Goblin Bombardment, Priest of Forgotten Gods, and Bloodghast.
You mentioned those cards and the dollar signs light up in my eyes, and we can fill in the rest after the fact, And the nice thing about a sacrifice deck is you don't really need good cards past a certain point. You just need warm bodies, and there are a lot of those to go around in the modern format.
Yeah. Or, if depending on how you want to debate zombies, cold bodies, whatever.
Sure. Can we work some Magus of the Bridge action in there? It's hard to do and maybe not even worth doing, but someone's going to try, and I salute whoever that person is.
I am looking forward to Sam Black's article because I know exactly who the person is.
Absolutely. So you can find Ari's articles and mine, along with Sam's, over at StarCityGames.com. You can find Ari on Twitter at ARMLX. Always have to think that one through for myself quickly. You can find me on Twitter at Dom and Ari. Anything else for the fine people out there before we send them on their way?
Go forth and battle with Modern Horizons 2, and then let us know if you're sick of the free spells already.
Absolutely. This is maybe the most fun time to be diving into the modern queues in years at this point. So we will see you there. Godspeed, and we'll talk to you all next time. Take care.